Appropriate location now. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate the introductions. Often the introduction is simply a review of where I have been, what I've done. This introduction is far more valuable. This introduction not only reviewed my own experience and Patty's experience in Ethiopia, but it also reviewed why Ethiopia is so critically important, and the concerns that you have, all of which I share. The concerns about the position of the Biden administration. The previous administration basically ignored Africa and and pulled out much of the American engagement. The Biden administration, I think, made some very serious errors. And those errors began, in my view, when they did not value what we value or should value here in the United States, and that is democracy, the rule of law, and the value of an election. The fact is that one of the, perhaps the only, viable free election in Ethiopia's history was the election that brought Abiy into power. And then the subsequent troubles and the view of the American administration to really, in my view, favor an insurgency against that election was simply wrong. Reasons for it, some of that discussion before I had the microphone might explain it. There were relationships that were built over the previous 25 years, and those relationships seem to be more important than what we like to talk about here in the United States, which is democracy and the vote of the people to decide which way the country would go and who would be its leaders. I hope that we are past that. Come on in. The events over the last now 2 years, or nearly 2 full years, have been very, very difficult. I've often found that people that I've talked to that support the TPLF have been unwilling to recognize facts of assassinations of key military leaders in Addis Ababa, facts of a effort by the TPLF simply overrunning a federal military base, in the north, taking the weapons and then conducting an insurgency, a violent insurgency. I don't know of any war ever in which there has not been damage to non-combatants. And there's much discussion about who did what to whom and when. But one thing that is clear is that the war that was initiated by the TPLF clearly resulted in atrocities all across, at least northern Ethiopia, and some even in the south and west. We have to move beyond that, and it's been my goal throughout this entire process to bring to the American government, since that insurgency began in 2020, that first Abiy was elected in what was considered by most every observer to be a free and fair election in a country that had not had such a thing in the past. Secondly, that as a government, we should be supporting an elected government and continue to put forth our values. Third, we should be supporting humanitarian causes and humanitarian efforts. Very, very difficult to do in a war. And I have no illusions about those difficulties. And there's much to be said about, well, was the aid made available, yes or no? Could it have gotten to the people that needed it, yes or no? The facts are that aid assistance was made available, and it didn't always get to where it was needed. Debate for a long time why that happened. But the goal is to end the war and to bring Ethiopia back together again. I know you follow this more closely than I do, and we know that today was the second day of a negotiations in South Africa. I don't know the results yet, perhaps you do, but the word from the first day was that they're talking. Now, how you put this back together is going to be a very complex and a very difficult to do, but it must be done. And as that takes place, or while that is taking place, it is becoming increasingly apparent that the federal government is very, very close to a significant victory in the north. We were talking a moment ago. My information is probably 12 or 20 hours out of date, but with the exception of Mekelle, it appears as though most of the north has been now occupied by the federal government. If that is the case, and if that holds, then Mekelle is almost certain to fall, and hopefully that'll be the end of the fighting. I would expect there to be some additional fighting in various communities, and probably what we might call, well, whatever we want to call it. It's a hopeful moment. In my discussions with the Ethiopian representatives in Washington, I've made it clear to them that the Abiy government needs to take certain steps to address humanitarian issues. And the debate goes back and forth. Is it sufficient? As I look at it, it's an effort to address the humanitarian concerns. Food, pharmaceuticals, and the like. As I said, very difficult to do this in a war zone. But it appeared to me, from the information that I had available to me, that the government was making a sincere effort to do that. A lot of that did not arrive where needed. Why? That's a factual issue that'll be discussed. But I do know that efforts were made by the Abiy government to deliver into the conflict zone food, pharmaceuticals, and other humanitarian needs. In some case, well, unfortunately, that was not recognized, certainly by the popular press. My view is CNN got this wrong from the outset and continues even to this day to get it wrong. Now, you have your information as to why that has happened. I don't want to go into that, but they were reporting one side of the story, in my view, in a slanted and inappropriate way. Not at all balanced. Relationships go back a long way, and perhaps that has something to do with it. But here we are today. Our goal, my goal, is to bring about a return to a stable Ethiopia in which all of the various ethnic groups, economic interests, regional interests can come together and form a government that is selected by the voters of Ethiopia. That's where this should go. That's not going to be easily done over the, and this is, my view is that the government that was in power for 25 years, 27 years, made a very, very bad mistake. Perhaps on purpose, perhaps out of naivete, but they created ethnic divisions and created ethnic groups within Ethiopia, rather than trying to create, to reduce that ethnic the ethnic conflict that has been with Ethiopia for many, many centuries. That created a foundation for trouble. And it's playing out across the country in ways, as the government, as the, if this war is to be settled, and in that, I would hope that the, going forward, that the long ethnic divisions be reduced, and that the country look to try to unify, not going to be easily done, but to try to create a national unity and a national identity that could provide the solutions to the myriad of issues, from education to health care to economic issues and the like. But the ethnic divisions that have been in place, at least for the last 27 years, formal ethnic divisions, I think create a very difficult situation going forward. Now, my hope and my work is to direct as best I can the Congress of the United States, particularly the Foreign Affairs Committee, and some people on the Foreign Affairs Committee that are more familiar with the previous government, the Tigrayan government, and have relationships that date back perhaps years. I would hope that the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House and the Senate move towards a policy of supporting the duly elected government, would be Abiy and his government, and seek to assist Ethiopia in rebuilding all parts of Ethiopia in a way that would bring all the factions, ethnic groups, together to work together for the future of what is clearly one of two critical countries, or maybe three if you consider South Africa, countries in Africa. And this brings us to the issue of Africa itself. If Ethiopia falls apart, Eastern Africa is in for generations of trouble. If Ethiopia is able to be stabilized, be a unified country, deal with the ethnic issues, the cultural issues, the religious issues that are there, and go forward as a strong, vibrant element in the future of Africa, Eastern Africa will be far better positioned. The alternative is chaos and war and very serious humanitarian problems. On the western side, you've got to look to Nigeria and all that's going on there, and it's not going well at all. And of course from the south, South Africa. Those are the three major power structures, not taking into account the countries that border along the Mediterranean. It is possible that this could go either direction. The peace negotiations are absolutely critical. I don't know how that will turn out in terms of dealing with the reality of an insurgency taking on a duly elected government. That's going to have to take very wise and careful negotiations, certainly by the Abiy government. And the TPLF is going to have to try to figure out how they would work in that context. But it must be done. We will see. We're 2 days in. Hopefully the negotiations will go on and ultimately be successful. That should be our primary goal. And for me, I have a scheduled meeting next week with the ambassador, special envoy, as I had with the previous envoy and with the various diplomats, to try to urge them to support what I've been sharing with you. Now, with regard to the question of trade relations with the United States, the time is not good. The law requires the State Department to make a decision by, I believe, mid-December. So there's not much time to address the legal challenges that the law presents. Some of those I know are already being addressed. One of them is the peace negotiations. Secondly, the humanitarian aid, a ceasefire, which may occur as we understand whatever comes out of the current fighting. Those are two. There's two more that have slipped my mind right now. I've made it clear to the U.S. government and to the Ethiopian government that those 5 requirements, they're on paper. And the U.S. government, by law, has to take into account and assess the progress on those 5. As I say, the time frame makes this difficult. The fighting is not over. The peace negotiations are underway, and that's good. And humanitarian aid is being made available, but may or may not be able to be delivered because of the fighting. We'll see. Now, having said all of that, I'm way beyond the normal role of a congressman. I'm way into diplomacy, but this is not new for me. In 2000, when some almost 150,000 Ethiopians and Eritreans were killed in that war, I took a group of returned Peace Corps volunteers to Eritrea, met with President Isaias, and then to Addis, and met with the Prime Minister and his cabinet. In those discussions, first in Eritrea and then in in Addis, the peace plan to end that war was put in place. Our team of 5 were able to talk to the leadership in a way that the U.S. government could not or would not. The result of that discussions back between these two governments was the peace plan that ended that war. Now, unfortunately, it took 20 years for it to be implemented. That's a whole other discussion why that didn't happen. But the Abiy government, right out of the box, implemented that peace agreement and probably set up the trouble that he then found about a year later. I'm going to continue to involve myself, and Patty will continue to involve herself. Our work never ends. We were there in 1966-68. I remember on the street of Addis, we were back after 6 months in Metu, street of Addis, trying to pick up some things that we needed back in Metu. I stepped out of a hardware store and bumped into a soldier that was carrying a rifle, and he pushed me aside, and I looked behind him, and it was Haile Selassie. I'm glad that he stopped me, otherwise it might have been a difficult situation because I would have run right into into Haile Selassie. So we've been at this a long time, and we love Ethiopia. We love Ethiopians. We find sorrow in the traumas that the country has had. The Great Famine in the 1985. I just noticed that one of you, I don't know where you are back there. There you are over. We did a fundraiser at the Fairmont Hotel to raise money for famine relief. At that time we'd gone back, interestingly, to Alamata, which was then one of the centers of the famine relief effort. It's a journey for us. It's been a journey of great joy, a journey of sorrow from time to time, but it's a journey that we're not going to stop, neither Patty or I. And I know it's a journey for all of you also. You're here in America. You share your tears. You share your expertise. You share your time on trying to make your home, your country, your birthright a better place. And in doing that, you also make America a better place. And all of you in your leadership, you are doing that. Your engagement in political activity speaks of the fundamental democracy that we have. You can engage. The Constitution guarantees your right to petition the government, and you're doing that. And I really appreciate your support. Thank you. And you join together with like-minded people and petition the government. I'll be back in Washington. I think my election will hopefully be successful. I have a new district that brings me back to the Bay Area, so I'll see many of you more often. I don't think the Sheba restaurant's still open in Berkeley, so that was some while ago, but there are others, and we enjoy our Ethiopian cuisine. Thank you so very, very much for all that you're doing, for Ethiopia. And thank you for the support. I need one thing. The financial support is always helpful. But the one thing that I must have is information and knowledge. And so please, through time, whether it be this conflict or the next crisis, whatever it may be, or maybe it's one of your relatives here in the United States or maybe back in Ethiopia or wherever. If I have knowledge, I might be able to do something. If I have no knowledge, then there's nothing I can do. So please continue doing what you've done, and that is to inform me. inform me on international policy. If you want to talk about the war in Ukraine, we could do that too. Or you want to talk about nuclear weapons, we can go there. But whatever it is on your mind, share that and share that knowledge with me. And hopefully I'll be able to use that to some good. And Patty and I will, from the very first day we stepped into Ethiopia in the fall of 1966, to the day we die, Ethiopia and Ethiopians will be people that we know and love. Thank you so very, very much.